All right, ready for a deep dive into something pretty cool. Lay it on me. Tiny home villages.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about those.
These clusters of mini houses popping up, especially in rural areas. We're going to see if it's just a fad or a sign of something bigger, like this neo-rural revolution.
Interesting.
We've got two sources for this deep dive, an actual executive charter for setting up a tiny home village, and then this document laying out this whole neo-rural idea.
Okay. Sounds pretty in-depth.
What really hooked me is like how they blend a modern, eco-conscious lifestyle with this old-school sense of community.
Yeah, I can see the appeal in that, combining the best of both worlds.
So could this be the future of rural living? What do you think?
It's an interesting question for sure. What's exciting to me is it's not just about housing, you know?
Right.
These documents, they highlight like a yearning for, a simpler life, connection to nature, and yeah, affordability too.
Right.
So could tiny home villages be a solution to some of the big issues, like the housing crisis, the decline of rural communities? Let's find out.
Okay, let's unpack this executive charter.
Ah,
It kicks off with this vision statement about creating intentional communities with affordable housing.
yeah.
But it's not just about cramming people into tiny spaces.
No, definitely not. The charter emphasizes adaptable housing, meaning it can like evolve with the residents' needs. And it's about fostering personal growth, but within a community. Like,
Mm.
imagine combining the best of self-sufficiency with the support of like-minded neighbors.
Yeah, I get that.
It's kind of like a modern take on the traditional village, but with solar panels and maybe a shared fiber optic internet connection, right?
Ooh, high-speed internet in a tiny home village. Sign me up.
Right.
But seriously, this idea of intentional living within a supportive community, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Have we seen this work before? I mean, are there examples of this?
We have, yeah. Think about like co-housing communities or eco-villages. They often thrive because residents, they share values and responsibilities.
Makes sense.
What's interesting here is how the tiny home village concept, it adds affordability to the mix, potentially opening it up to a much wider range of people.
Yeah, okay, so it's not just for, let's say, retirees or folks with a lot of DIY skills.
Exactly. The charter aims to make this lifestyle accessible to anyone seeking community and a simpler way of life. It's about choice and having options beyond the, traditional housing market.
Right.
Breaking free from the mold a little bit.
Okay, so the vision is compelling, but what about the mission? What's like the driving force behind these villages?
The charter clearly states it, establishing sustainable communities built on collaboration, respect, and individual sovereignty.
Now, individual sovereignty, that sounds pretty heady. What does that actually look like in a tiny home village?
Think of it as having agency over your own life, but within the community. It could be, growing your own food, participating in decision-making, or simply having the freedom to live in a way that aligns with your values. It's about balancing personal autonomy with the benefits of communal living.
It's like having your tiny home AD your independence too.
Exactly.
I like that. And they lay out these core values like collaboration, compassion, sustainability, sovereignty, and resilience. And they just seem to go hand in hand with this whole intentional living thing.
Absolutely. These values aren't just buzzwords. They're, the foundation.
Yeah.
And you see them reflected in other social movements, too. Like think about, the sharing economy or the push for local food systems. There's a common thread of people wanting more control over their lives and a deeper sense of connection to their community.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's fascinating how this tiny home village concept
Yeah,
seems to tap into so many different trends and desires.
it is.
It's like a microcosm of a bigger societal shift.
It is. And speaking of big shifts, the charter outlines something they call a massively transformative purpose, or MTP. It's their ultimate goal, their big dream.
All right, here's where it gets really interesting. A massively transformative purpose. Lay it on me.
Think big picture, revolutionizing housing accessibility and intentional community living by creating a scalable model for tiny home villages.
Wow.
Imagine a world where safe, affordable, and community-oriented housing is available to everyone, not just, a select few.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It-
But is Is it actually achievable? I mean, we're talking about changing the entire housing paradigm.
It is a bold vision, but not entirely out of reach.
Okay.
Think about how much the world has changed in the past few decades, right?
Right.
Technology has disrupted industries, social movements have reshaped policies, and people are, increasingly looking for alternatives to the status quo. The potential is there, but it will require overcoming some significant challenges.
Okay, I'm all for ambitious goals, but let's get practical. How do they plan to achieve this MTP? What are the actual steps involved?
The charter lays out some key goals, legal advocacy for tiny homes, establishing the first village, building a support network, and of course, figuring out the financial sustainability of the whole thing.
Those are some pretty big hurdles. From what I've read, just getting tiny homes recognized as legal dwellings is a battle in many places.
You're absolutely right. Zoning laws and building codes often don't accommodate tiny homes, so there's a lot of work to be done on the legal front. Then there's the challenge of finding suitable land, securing funding, and, developing the infrastructure for these villages.
Sounds like they need to be master negotiators, community organizers, and financial wizards all rolled into one.
Pretty much. But it's not just about the practicalities. They also need to build a strong sense of community and shared purpose among, the residents themselves.
Right, because even in a tiny village, people are still people. You could have different personalities, different needs, potentially different visions for how the community should function.
Exactly. So navigating those social dynamics and creating a truly harmonious and inclusive community is going to be essential.
Okay, so we've got this ambitious MTP and a whole slew of challenges to overcome. But how does this all connect back to the Neo-Rural Manifesto we mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Does that tie into the bigger picture?
It absolutely does. The manifesto expands on the tiny home village concept by outlining a broader movement to revitalize rural America.
Okay.
It emphasizes core principles that are very much in line with the tiny home village initiative, sustainability, community, affordability, autonomy, and a transformation of, our legal and social structures.
So it's like the tiny home villages are a flagship project for this larger neo-rural movement.
Yeah.
A tangible example of how these principles can be put into action.
That's a great way to put it. The manifesto itself is like a call to action, urging people to get involved and be part of creating this new vision for rural America. It's about redefining what it means to, live in a rural community and showcasing the potential for innovation, sustainability, and a high quality of life.
So far, this all sounds pretty idyllic.
Yeah.
Affordable housing, a close-knit community, living in harmony with nature.
Right.
But let's be real, there have to be some potential drawbacks or challenges that we should consider.
Of course. It's important to be realistic and acknowledge that no solution is perfect.
Right.
While the vision is compelling, there are some potential downsides to consider.
Like what? What are some of the things that could go wrong or that people might not anticipate?
Well, for one, we need to shift the view of rural America as being, stuck in the past.
Yeah.
This neo-rural movement, it aims to show that these communities can be vibrant, innovative, attractive to, a new generation, not just a place people move away from.
So it's about changing the narrative. Instead of rural flight, it's like rural renaissance. But that takes more than just cute tiny homes, right?
Right.
What about jobs, internet access, stuff that makes modern life, modern?
Exactly. That's a huge hurdle, ensuring these communities have access to high-speed internet, diverse job opportunities, and the amenities that, attract and retain residents. It's not about romanticizing a simpler past. It's about creating a thriving future in rural areas.
Which brings up another potential snag.
Well,
Money.
Yeah.
How do these villages get funded?
Yeah.
Convincing investors to back something this unconventional can't be easy.
You're right. Funding is a major challenge.
Yeah.
These initiatives often rely on grants, donations, and creative financing models. It requires a lot of, hustle and convincing stakeholders that this isn't just a whimsical idea, but a viable solution to, real problems.
Especially when you're talking about challenging existing building codes and zoning laws.
Yeah.
I mean, there's bound to be pushback from, folks who prefer things stay the way they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Resistance can come from individuals attached to traditional ways of life, fearing disruption, and institutions can be slow to adapt, creating bureaucratic roadblocks. It's a bit like, turning a giant ship. It takes time, persistence, and a lot of persuading.
Okay, so we've got the practical challenges, but what about the social side of things?
Yeah.
We touched on this earlier, Even in tiny homes, you still have human nature to contend with. Could these communities become too insular, maybe even exclusive?
That's a valid concern. Intentional communities often attract people with, shared values, which is great for cohesion,
Right.
but it can lead to, like, echo chambers or unintentionally excluding those who don't fit the mold.
So diversity and inclusivity are crucial, both in the people who live there and in, like, how the community interacts with the wider world.
Precisely. It takes conscious effort, like outreach that's genuinely welcoming to diverse backgrounds, and a community culture that values, open-mindedness alongside those shared values.
It sounds like striking that balance is key. You want the close-knit feeling, but not at the expense of shutting others out.
And it's an ongoing process, not a one-time fix, right?
Yeah.
Disagreements are inevitable in any community, so having systems for, conflict resolution, open communication, that's essential. And, patience.
Right.
Building a strong community, both literally and figuratively, takes time.
And a good dose of humility, I'd imagine. Being willing to, like, admit when you're wrong, learn from others. Not always easy, even in a tiny house.
Definitely. This is pioneering stuff. It comes with challenges. But let's flip the script. What about the potential benefits of this neo-rural movement? What could emerge if it really gains traction?
Okay, yeah, let's get optimistic. What's the upside here?
Well, environmentally, the focus on sustainability is huge. Tiny homes use less energy and resources to, build and maintain.
Right.
Add in renewable energy, local food systems, reduced waste. It aligns with the movement towards a more circular economy.
So it's walking the walk, not just talking about being green. It's a lifestyle that's actually in sync with nature.
Exactly. And socially. Imagine revitalized rural towns with, like, strong connections between people where you know your neighbors and support each other. It's a contrast to, the isolation many feel in cities.
A modern take on that traditional sense of community we were talking about earlier.
That's it. And for individuals, the appeal of, affordability, a simpler life, more autonomy, that's powerful. Lots of folks are seeking an alternative to the city grind, and this offers that.
But it's not just escaping from something, right?
Right.
It's about actively building something new and positive.
Right. And here's where, that legal and social transformation comes in. The neo-rural movement challenges norms around housing, land use, community development. It's pushing for policies that make this lifestyle accessible to, more people.
So it's a grassroots movement for a more equitable and sustainable future, starting from the ground up, literally.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot, the vision, the hurdles, the possibilities. But what does this all mean for, you, the listener?
The takeaway. This neo-rural movement with its tiny home villages, it represents a hopeful vision.
Yeah.
It addresses housing, sustainability, and that, deep human need for connection.
It reminds us that we're not powerless. We can, like, shape the world we want to live in.
Absolutely. Even if you're not ready to move to a tiny home village today, these ideas are worth pondering.
Because it's bigger than just the houses, right? It's about rethinking how we live, relate to each other, and, create a more fulfilling future. But, okay, let's say someone listening is intrigued. Where do they even begin exploring this world?
Great question. There's a wealth of resources out there. Online communities, organizations focused on tiny living and intentional communities, workshops, events. You can connect with like-minded folks. A simple internet search is a great start. You might be surprised what's happening, near you.
It's like a whole underground movement that's, like, starting to surface.
Precisely. And the more people engage, the more momentum it gains.
So to wrap up, let's leave our listeners with something to chew on.
Okay.
We talked about reshaping the American landscape. But what about, like, the ripple effects beyond that? If this really takes off, what other changes might we see in society?
That's fascinating to consider. If this movement flourishes, I think we could see a shift in values away from, consumerism towards a more minimalist and sustainable way of life. Maybe a resurgence of, like, local economies or renewed appreciation for community.
It's a hopeful vision, and one that I think a lot of people are craving right now.
I agree. And while there will be bumps along the way, the potential rewards are, immense.
So, to our listeners, we say this: explore the resources, connect with others, and imagine the possibilities. The future of rural living, and maybe even society as a whole, could be a lot smaller, more sustainable, and more connected than we ever thought possible. But hey, there's one last thing I'm curious about.
Oh, what's that?
We've talked about the potential benefits of this movement. But are there any, like, unintended consequences we should be thinking about? What could happen if this goes mainstream that, maybe isn't on anyone's radar yet?
That's a great question, and one that highlights the importance of thoughtful planning and foresight.
Yeah.
One potential consequence to consider is the impact on, existing rural communities.
Interesting.
If there's a sudden influx of new residents with, different values and lifestyles, it could create tension
Right.
or even displacement if not managed carefully.
So it's not as simple as just plopping down a tiny home village anywhere and assuming everyone will be happy about it.
Right. It requires sensitivity to the existing community's needs and concerns. Open dialogue and a collaborative approach to development.
I see. Yeah.
Another potential consequence is the commodification of the neo-rural movement itself.
Mm-hmm.
As it gains popularity, there's a risk of it becoming trendy and losing its, core values.
Yeah, I can see that happening. Suddenly you've got developers slapping up luxury tiny homes, marketed as eco-chic, and selling a romanticized version of rural living that's, out of reach for most people.
Exactly. It's crucial to maintain a focus on affordability, accessibility, and genuine sustainability, rather than letting it become just another lifestyle trend for the privileged few.
So it's about staying true to the, core principles of the movement, even as it grows and evolves.
Yeah.
What about you? What are your biggest, hopes and concerns for this neo-rural movement going forward?
My biggest hope is that it will spark a genuine transformation in, how we think about housing, community, and our relationship with the environment. I hope it empowers people to create more sustainable and fulfilling lives, both in rural areas and beyond. My concern is that it could become fragmented and lose its momentum. There are so many different groups and initiatives working in this space.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like they're operating in silos.
So more collaboration and communication are needed to create a truly unified movement.
Exactly. A shared vision, a common platform, and a sense of collective purpose will be essential to, driving real change.
It's almost like we need a neo-rural manifesto for the neo-rural movement itself.
Right.
A set of guidelines for how to grow and evolve while staying true to the core values.
That's a fantastic idea. A roadmap for the revolution, so to speak.
Well, there you have it. A deep dive into the world of tiny home villages and the neo-rural revolution. We've explored the vision, the challenges, the potential benefits, and even some unintended consequences to, watch out for. But ultimately, it's up to each of us to decide what resonates with us, what inspires us, and what role we want to play in, shaping the future.
And whether or not you decide to embrace the tiny home lifestyle, the ideas behind this movement are worth considering.
Absolutely.
How can we create more sustainable and fulfilling communities?
Yeah.
How can we reconnect with nature and each other? How can we build a future that prioritizes, well-being over endless consumption?
These are big questions, and there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
But the neo-rural movement is offering a compelling path forward, one that's worth, exploring and supporting. So we leave you with this. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep dreaming big. The future is ours to create.